Now that you've accessed your inner room, well, what begins to happen? Isn't that an interesting question? Really, what begins to happen? And our tendency is to want to sit with the question, listen to the experience. And one of the intros to this, I'd like to simply suggest that at the Lama retreat, one of the most memorable moments of that time together was each morning after breakfast and a little quiet time, Father Thomas would gather the 12 disciples and women were present. No. And he'd gather us together for a conference, a morning conference, which would go for an hour and a half. And all of that material that was part of that experience ultimately got published in Open Mind, Open Heart. It became the seedbed of Invitation to Love, the Spiritual Journey tapes. And then the third book in the triad, Intimacy with God. But what I'd want to simply say, something that touched me very deeply, was Thomas's observation during that particular time, almost like a wisdom saying, out of his own lived experience, you know, as a Trappist monk, as an abbot, very much into the tradition. He and John of the Cross and Teresa, he ate, breathed Teresa and John, was just a part of who he was. But he basically made this statement, that today, in order to present the spiritual journey in any kind of a credible way in relationship to where we are, the journey must be presented through what he describes as the psychological paradigm. So just recalling that, you know, and then bending back and looking at the initial works, Open Mind, Open Heart, Invitation to Love, Intimacy with God. So much psychological language. You know, what would really blow people out of the water would be, well, as he described, the various types of thought, and people are kind of listening. And then the fifth type of thought, psychological unloading. What is that all about? The paradigm of false self, true self. You know, the hurts of a lifetime. Divine psychotherapy. All of that psychological language simply reinforced Thomas's wisdom that if you're going to meet contemporary people in a contemporary way that respects the beauty and the depth of our spiritual tradition, that initial presentation needs to be made through the psychological paradigm. So that, I just wanted to say that as backdrop, because for me there was a wonderful shift that took place, and I kind of root that in 2005 with the publication of this particular book, Manifesting God. And well, what begins to happen in the inner room? Something that we need to be very much aware of is that around that time, probably some years before, but certainly in 2005 and beyond, Father Thomas took all of this psychological material, all of this psychological experience, and he placed it within the experience of the inner room. A shift, I would call it a shift. And for me, it's been a very, very significant, helpful shift. Yeah, is that okay? Just to let that, just to be aware of that, as we begin to ask the question, what begins to happen in the inner room? And in 2005, Thomas begins to describe three moments. And they're moments that are experienced beyond thoughts, beyond words, beyond insights, because we are in the cloud of unknowing through the cloud of forgetting. And we're simply seeking to intuit what begins to happen in the inner room. And so Thomas would say that when we are in the inner room, in a mode of receptivity, for me, receptivity is the pure gold of centering prayer. When we are in the inner room, in a mode of receptivity, with open hands and open hearts, the first moment that Thomas suggests that it unfolds continually, never stopping, it's ongoing, is that we are allowing God the space within the depths of our hearts to affirm us in the very core of our being. Affirming us in the very core of our being. Ongoing. It's happening all the time, whether we're aware of it or not, because this is who God is. God is love, and this love is an energy that is continually pouring out and permeating and upholding all that is. And so that we are allowing God the space to affirm us in the very core of our being. And through that ongoing affirmation, God just simply loving us just as we are. And what are we doing? We're consenting. Gail, we're consenting, and we're letting go of whatever would draw us out of that commitment to consent. That's the dynamic. And what is unfolding is that willingness on our part to allow ourselves to simply receive, to receive the inflow of God's unconditional love. A love that is seeking to heal and to purify and to transform. The beauty of that first moment, as it continues to unfold throughout the journey, is that through this affirmation, at the very core of our being, God is seeking to give us back to ourselves as deeply loved. We are loved by God just as we are. Probably the greatest act of faith we ever make. Because from a psychological, historical point of view, we may have some questions. Let it go. Yield, surrender. That's part of the process of surrender. Letting it go, letting go of those obstacles or blocks, letting it go in order to allow God's love to permeate and to penetrate every fiber of our being. So God is giving us back to ourselves. It's one of the great fruits of showing up. Allowing God that kind of maximum space, expansiveness, where we simply allow ourselves to receive. So God is giving us back to ourselves. And it really touches, if you will, a very core truth. At the end of the day, my brothers and sisters, at the end of the day, after all the doing is done, who are you? It's the identity question. And at the end of the day, and from all eternity, you are You are God's beloved daughters and sons. This is who you are. And that awareness, that growing awareness and acceptance of our identity is the fruit of centering prayer, or the fruit of prayer. You probably, or many of you will recall the late Thomas Merton, New Seeds of Contemplation, where the Trappist monk assures us, experientially, that the deepest seeds of our identity, who we really are, you interested in that? Who we really are revealed to us. How? Through the love and through the mercy of God. And all we're being invited to do in all humility is to say yes. Again, consent, consent, consent. And we grow in that awareness. We grow in that awareness that we're deeply, deeply loved. It's the principle and the foundation of the spiritual life. Worthiness has nothing to do with it. Our emeritus Pope, Pope Benedict, in his very, very first encyclical, written a number of years ago, entitled, God is Love, went on to point out within that magnificent letter that Christianity, Catholicism, is not a fear-based religion. It is a religion of love. And oftentimes when I'm with the folks, I'll mention that as I'm mentioning it to you, and then I'll say, has that been your experience? Oh. We carry a lot of fear-based stuff. And the only way that that's going to be healed is through love. So get out of your head and go to the deepest place of the heart in that first moment to allow God simply to love us. And what the willingness on our part to consent and to receive that love brings about not only an affirmation of the deepest seeds of our identity, but it also brings about a profound sense of healing. And what is being healed? What is being healed in that first moment is any residual negativity that we may have imbibed relative to our own self-image. That's being healed through love. It's being healed, and the same with any, and this is so important, so important. The other aspect of healing is that God in love is healing whatever residual negativity we may carry in relationship to our image of God. You know, and if you or I or any of us even carry a residual of negativity in terms of our image of God, whatever way you want to project that, it's a block. As Thomas Keating would say, who is going to fall in love with someone that they are afraid of? It doesn't happen in human experience or anywhere else. So that healing that takes place in that first moment through the inflow of God's love is that twofold healing of negative self-image, negative image of God. And through that healing, we're able to consent to the gift, to the beautiful gift that we are. We're terrific. Can you consent? Can you consent to your own beauty, to your own depth, to the divine potential that God has placed within each of us? I'll say a little more about that. So that's the first moment. And then the second moment that begins to unfold, and again, this was in 2005, Thomas begins to say, and I think this is so resonating with human experience, is that if you tap into your own experience of relationship, that any time in your human relationships you have felt and experienced the love of another person, what begins to happen? You begin to trust. You begin to trust the love of that person and accept that. And that's why oftentimes in our human experience of relationships, without any doubt, one of the greatest wounds that we carry is what I would describe as the wound of broken trust. Anytime a relationship that has been part of our lives breaks down, without being judgmental or trying to figure it out, when it happens, it creates an experience of broken trust. And in my own experience over the years and listening to so many people in counseling and spiritual direction, it is no exaggeration from my point of view to simply suggest many of us, if not all of us, at some point carry a wound of broken trust. I didn't see it coming. The rug was just pulled out from under me, and it's like, so my point being that even in this experience, as you go to the inner room, as you allow yourself to be deeply, deeply loved, that love, that permeating love of God will also heal the wound of broken trust. It's a magnificent, liberating healing, moving us out of, fear of taking a risk. I'll never do it again, by God. So up goes the wall, and I'm doing all right. Keep on moving. That's a lot of crap. You've got to go. You don't have to do anything. The appeal, go deeper and give God that opportunity to simply continue to help you in the midst of our human experience to learn again how to trust one another. As Thomas Keating says so eloquently and so firmly, without trust, there is no relationship. If you don't like that, call Thomas. I don't deal with that, but I believe it. I do believe it. And I can understand, as I've listened over the years, I can understand why people experience such struggle in this area, because it's one of the deepest, deepest hurts that we absorb when we have had that experience of broken trust. So in the inner room, what is happening? God is healing. God is healing that wound with your consent. With your consent. So that when the memory or whatever of the brokenness comes up, yield, surrender, let go. That's divine therapy. Let it go. You don't have to play out the drama again unless you want to be a victim. Oh, what an awful thing to say. Well, I've said it, and I'm not taking it back. Grow up. So that's that. And when trust is in place, and this is also very Ignatian, when trust is in place, that second moment, the love leading to a deeper level of trust, then what else begins to happen in the inner room is that God then, this God of love, in response to his love, begins to soften up what Father Thomas describes as the hard pan of our false self system. This is happening in the inner room. God is softening up the hard pan of our false self-system, those blocks that prevent the free flow of God's love. So in response to God's love, God is healing those wounds by bringing those wounds to conscious awareness. You know, there's the psychological content of our prayer. Yield, surrender, let go. In the words of Martin Laird, don't go back into the cocktail party of the head. Oh. And then the memory, and then with the drama, and then here we go again. You know, it's like, give it a rest. Allow God that freedom to soften up what blocks our capacity to deepen in this loving relationship. So we look at, you know, the hard pan of the false self-system in different ways that Father Thomas has spoken of that so eloquently. We talk about the wounds of a lifetime. Oh, here we go again. Well, it's part of the process. The wounds of a lifetime. And one of the ways that, from within my own personal experience, there's been an enormous, enormous healing for me. How would I identify one of the wounds of my lifetime, if you will, without getting dramatic? There's no Academy Awards here. Well, here it is in living color. I was the youngest of three. I had two older sisters who have gone home to God, and I'm the baby brother. Much loved, I might add. And my dad was a professional athlete. He actually played for a farm team for the Chicago White Sox just before World War I. And then he went into the service, and then he came back and married my mom, and the rest is history. My dad was about my size. And you know, might look at me and you say, let me just, I'm not opening this up for discussion, but let me just say, I am not a natural athlete. I'm very active. I was out this morning doing, I spurned Maru body work because I was jogging along the path. So I've been very active over my lifetime, but I'm not a natural. And I can honestly say to you that as a youngster growing up, my dad, who again was always very, very active, but my grandfather, his dad, was an alcoholic, a working alcoholic, but an alcoholic. And he would go to my dad's ball games and would literally make a fool of himself. And my dad was very, very sensitive and embarrassed by all of that, and so on and so forth. And so as I was growing up, you know, my father never, ever decided to live out his own agenda through me. Never forced me to go out and to play. I did, but, you know, very sloppily. He never really wanted me to live out his dream, so to speak. So what happened? It was very nonverbal. But what I experienced, and this came to me much later in life, I absorbed his disappointment. He never said anything, never. That experience, the beginning of that wound, that absorbing that disappointment created within me a tendency to feel very, very inadequate. And that tendency became very deeply embedded. Now, I pulled it off pretty well, but there was always that knotting feeling of inadequacy. And it seemed to come together, I can't tell you exactly when, but as the fruit of centering prayer, just experiencing that connection, that awareness. And through that connection, to be able to embrace deeply that feeling of inadequacy, and through the embrace, allowing God the space to heal that wound in its roots. And I'm not suggesting, that I'm beyond it, but let me tell you, it's a whole new world. Through that experience, and my own relationship with my father has, it's just blossomed. I can't tell you how much I love him. And that is not BS. It comes from within the depths of an awareness of his not wanting to get in the way of whatever was going on in me. So that's just an experience, an example of a deep wound. And why I mention it isn't just, again, to tell another story, but to simply remind us that these wounds of a lifetime that we have absorbed, just through the fragility and the vulnerability of the human condition, are deeply embedded, and they become habitual patterns that very much affect us. And that's why the healing and the purification is so important. Because for me, that feeling of inadequacy that had taken such deep root within my being, it took time for God to heal those patterns. And that's purification. And I remember a couple of years ago, I think it was at the advanced study out in Snowmass, that Thomas was able to host. I think it might have been 2005, 2006. And he was just beginning to, offer us some insights. And at some point, I can't remember the point he was making, but he just looked out at all of us with those compassionate eyes and said, purification goes on and on and on. And we're being invited to embrace ourselves in that process, to allow God the space to love us through his desire to heal those wounds, to purify those tendencies that, if unchecked, begin to be the ferment of what, again, we describe as the emotional programs for happiness, those defensive reactions that come out of unresolved wounds. So it's the process. God healing. So those are the moments, those are the three moments that are unfolding in the room. Affirmation, a growing sense of trust, and then the healing the wounds of a lifetime. We talk about the wounds. Gail mentioned yesterday about the 4 consents, Thomas Keating's theory on human growth and development, that we're called to make 4 consents, consenting to the fundamental goodness of our being, consenting, and this is a huge one, consenting to our creative and also our sexual energy. Oh my God. Consenting, embracing, integrating. That's the process. And then consenting to the experience of limitation or the aging process. And then consenting to transformation, which is a willingness to die to the false self, or to detach more and more from those emotional programs for happiness that are simply part of our defense mechanism because we're still living in fear. And God wants us to be free. free. Free to be who we are. Now, just a little further expansion. I described the 3 moments that Thomas beautifully describes himself in manifesting God. And then at that 2008 gathering out in Snowmass, he presented another diagram. Thomas's whole life is just one diagram after another. They never stop coming. Well, this particular diagram centered around the question, what begins to happen in the inner room? And he goes on to say, and I thought this was eloquent. It is eloquent. He goes on to suggest, to say very clearly, when we are in the inner room, beyond thoughts, beyond words, beyond insights, in that mode of receptivity, the divine presence, the indwelling presence of God, the God we seek, is closer to us than we are to ourselves 24/7. God has chosen to abide within the fertile soil of our hearts. That's a response to God's love, as God seeks to express that love to each one of us tailor-made, just as you are. You know. So again, the divine presence, he speaks about affirmation. He speaks about the freeing up of the repressed material within our unconscious. But the other point that he adds to this particular diagram is that also, and I think this is so important as we reflect upon the present into the future, within the inner room, God is not only affirming and healing, but God is also cultivating the seeds of our divine potential. And this is what Father Thomas further develops through that handout, that diagram. And what are the seeds of our divine potential? We can get so focused on the wound and the therapy and the healing, and it's like, get a life. But what is this divine potential? What are the seeds of our divine potential? And Thomas goes on to describe faith and hope and love. Those seeds of faith and hope and love, gifts, pure gifts that God has planted within the fertile soil of our hearts, and they're growing and they're developing. The virtues of faith and hope and love, and the moral virtues of prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. The gifts and the fruits of the Holy Spirit that Thomas has described so beautifully in other publications, but bringing all of that together as part of the inner room experience, divine potential, the gifts and the fruits of the Holy Spirit, and then finally embracing more and more as part of our conscious awareness, embracing more and more and more the spirit of the Beatitudes. Because what's it all about, Alfie? It's all about putting on the mind and the heart of Christ. It's all about being willing in response to God's love, and with a grateful heart being willing to be agents of manifestation, manifesting the fruits of our divine potential. In the midst of a broken-hearted world, we are, through the grace of God, agents of transformation. Through the grace of God, we are called to be co-laborers cooperators in the building up of the kingdom of God. Oh, the whole world is falling apart. Well, get out there and make a difference. That's the fruit of our prayer. It's not a mode of escape. It's a call to action. And that action needs to be nurtured and nourished within the experience of God's love. Because it is only that experience that can give to us the energy, the empowerment to become one with our brothers and sisters. Beyond cultural conditioning, beyond ethnicity, wonderful gifts that speak to our originality and our uniqueness. But it doesn't stop there. At the end of the day, we are one. Now, how do we express that oneness? The fruit of our divine potential. How do we do that? That, to me, I think Adele was saying, as we look into the future, of this particular community, what is the future? How do you look into the future? We're just not a comfortable group. Oh, I've got my little group. Meeting once a week. What more do you want? I want a hell of a lot more. The going out, the manifestation. And I believe, and I think Thomas would agree, that I believe one of the most concrete ways that we can do this is through our willingness to participate and to be a part of ongoing interreligious dialogue. You can look at Iraq, and you can look at Syria, and you can look at ISIS, and you can see, the violence that is part of that particular entity, and sort of, wow, what do we do? And Father Thomas would say, I believe, that the great challenge of institutional religion is to come together. And to come together and to acknowledge, in all humility, those areas of agreement. We are so much at one. And we can come through dialogue, through praying together out of our own particular tradition. We can come to that point of being able to respect legitimate differences. But imagine, just dream, what's the vision? What would that look like? That we would be living out. We would be living out one of the deepest desires in the heart of Jesus Christ, expressed at a point of great vulnerability. When Jesus said on the night before he died, that they may be one, Father, as you are in me, and I am in you, that they may be one in us. Why? So that the world may know that you have sent me. So what's your vision? What is your vision? As you kind of look at your own experience and where you are, and wow, think big thoughts. Don't give up. Don't over-politicize. And as our Holy Father says, stop obsessing about the cultural issues. What do you mean? Just what I said. Stop obsessing and go deeper, so that through that depth we can look at some of those issues and bring the love of God into those issues that up to this point we have allowed to become such sources of division. It's a scandal. And we're being called. I really believe, at this stage in my own life, This is it, and I'm telling you. What I feel so drawn to as the fruit of my prayer is this commitment to live out, to embrace that desire so eloquently expressed by Jesus. How can I contribute on the level of word, on the level of action, to that deeper sense of unity that binds us together as brothers and sisters? How can we do that? Well, when we get this thing solved, let it go. Why do you need to solve it? Well, probably because I'm right. Well, guess what? You're not. So I just offer that to you. I think that's enough. God bless you.